Good afternoon, everyone. Chris here from Bread and Bourbon, and this evening Lizzie and I are going to make a pasta bolognese following a recipe I saw on the New York Times. And what better to go with a fresh batch of pasta than a nice loaf of bread? So I'm going to be following a recipe that I got from Betty Crocker with a couple modifications. And what it calls for, the basic recipe is 3.5 cups of bread flour, 1¼ cups of hot water, 1 teaspoon sugar, 2¼ teaspoons of yeast, Italian seasoning optional, so anywhere from 2 teaspoons up to 3 tablespoons. I go on the heavier side. 2 tablespoons of olive oil, a pinch of salt, and then we're going to have 1 cup of hard cheese, in this case Asiago, but you can also substitute. What I'm going to be adding to this recipe, what I'm making it a little bit different, is I'm actually going to be adding about 2 medium or 1 large clove worth of garlic. I'm going to go a little extra heavy on olive oil, and I blended my flour, so I've got 2 cups of all-purpose and 1 cup of whole wheat flour. So I'm really excited to make and enjoy this bread. We're going to take about 25 minutes to prepare. It's actually broken into 3 different rises, so we're going to mix only a portion of the flour with the water, let it rise for an hour, add the rest of our flour, let it rise for another hour before we do our shaping. We got our cheese, and then finally we're going to do a bake, and the bake is going to take about 35 minutes. So all in all, this should take us right about 4 to 4.5 hours to make, from starting now to when it's coming out of the oven nice and fresh. All right, really looking forward to diving in. So what I'm going to get started with first is actually I'm going to prep some garlic. And to get more of the garlic flavor into the dough, I'm actually going to mince it and then cook it on the stovetop in some olive oil to get the flavor infused into the oil just for about a minute or 2, and then I can add that into my mixed dough as soon as I have it in there with the yeast. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take 1 cup of my mixture, and I've added it into my bowl so I can get working. And I've also added 2¼ teaspoons of yeast to my mix. And what I want to do next is add a little bit of Italian seasoning. This is where I'm getting a little bit outside of the recipe. So we're just going to mix this in, try to make sure we have a nice even mixture. So now in here we have flour, yeast, and Italian seasoning. I'm going to add my olive oil infused with garlic that I just prepared. And my hot water. Now I'm going to cover and let this rise for about an hour before I add the rest of my flour and ingredients. It's been an hour. Our 1 cup of water has been sitting with our cup of flour with the yeast that we added, as well as the olive oil and garlic. What's next is I actually still have 2 cups of flour blended with some additional Italian seasoning and a teaspoon of salt that I'm going to slowly mix 1/2 cup at a time into my dough mixture. Once it no longer is accepting with my wooden spatula, I'll transfer to my kneading surface so I can mix it in more before letting it sit for about 15 minutes before I do another knead. We're gonna let this sit for 15 minutes, let the gluten relax a little bit, and then I'm gonna knead it until it's nice and soft and supple. And we're gonna let it rise for an hour. See you in 15. After I've kneaded the dough, that's when I incorporate my Asiago cheese. So while it's sitting for this few minutes, I'm gonna chop this up, get into nice chunk-sized bits. You can go as small or as fine as you want. You can grate it, although I do like having sort of coarsely chopped so you can get those nice pockets of cheese in your bread. Okay. Can't help myself, it's pretty good. Okay, so I've been working the dough pretty hard with the kneading. I'm starting to get a little tearing, even though I've only got about half of my cheese into my bread so far. So I'm gonna let it sit for 5 minutes, just let those gluten fibers relax a little bit more. That way they're not gonna be tearing as much. So after 5 more minutes, I'm gonna come back, continue kneading it, and continue getting that cheese in there. If you don't see as much tearing on your bread, then you're fine, but sometimes letting it sit for a little bit in the middle of your kneading process does make it easier. We're in the middle of our kneading process. It's sat for just a few minutes just to let the gluten fibers loosen up. So I'm gonna get back to it and continue getting this cheese into our loaf before we get ready for our rise. Always my favorite part. So we're good to go. I didn't get all of the cheese in here. I was intending to get every little bit over in this pile inside, but I did reduce my flour a little bit for this recipe. So if I can't get all the cheese in, that's okay. I do still have some reserve that's gonna go on top later. So for now, I'm going to put this in my mixing bowl, add a little bit of olive oil so it doesn't stick, and let it rise for an hour. Our loaf has been rising for an hour. Now we're just going to shape it, let it rise for 1 more hour, and we're ready to bake. So here's our loaf so far. I want to shape this into a football-sized loaf, and to do that, here's the part that was face down. I'm going to pull the edges in. A little bit like that. And then I flip it over, and using the tension of the board, I'm going to roll it towards me. This creates surface tension across the loaf. And just like that, we're shaped. You can keep going a little bit longer, but as long as you create enough tension, you get in the shape you want. You've now kind of stretched your gluten network across your loaf surface. And I'm going to place it onto my parchment paper that has already been lightly floured. I'm going to flour my surface a little bit more. Get back in there. We're going to cover it one more time with plastic wrap for our last rise. 1 more hour, and then we're baking. Well, it's been another hour, and our loaf has doubled in size. I've got a glass of wine because we're making the bolognese behind me, and if you're cooking with wine, you might as well have a glass to enjoy it with. So all we have left to do to finish this off is I'm going to take off my saran wrap, spray lightly with cool water. If you don't have a spray bottle, taking like a damp paper towel and then squeezing out some of the drops is a good alternative. I'm going to sprinkle this with more flour. And last but not least, we're going to score the top. And so cutting lengthwise down the top, I'm going to try to cut about 1/2 inch deep. If you do it in one go, that is best. You want to make sure you have a nice sharp knife. Hold it about a 45-degree angle and then drag it across. Now, we have the rest of our cheese put aside. We're going to put that in there. Sprinkle on top. And we're good to go. We're ready to bake now. I've got my oven preheated to 450 degrees. I'm going to bake for 10 minutes at 450 and then lower the temperature to 400 and finish it for another 20 to 25 minutes. Another thing that you can do is put a 9 by 9 inch pan filled with water. Keep the water about 1/2 inch from the top. You don't want it to be overflowing, especially later when you remove it. It'll be really hot. But by putting a pan with water on your bottom rack, that'll introduce more humidity to your oven and make sure your loaf will cook really nice, even if we're doing it in our own kitchen. So, let's see how it turns out. We're done. Let's check it out and see how it turned out. Ooh, that smells good. Dang. Ta-da. Asiago cheese. This smells so delicious. Let's let this sit for, let it sit for about 5-10 minutes. And we'll cut it open and try a slice. I'll see how this thing looks, and then we can give it a taste. Oh, that smells incredible. That is so good. The Asiago and the garlic taste fantastic. It is a really delicious bread. You've got to give this one a try if you can. Well, we're having this, like I said, with our pasta. We're going to be done cooking that in a couple hours, and until next time, thanks guys.